In a world where assumptions shape our daily interactions, where the color of skin often determines the content of character presumed, and where wealth creates invisible barriers between human souls, sometimes the most profound moments happen in the spaces between languages. What happens when a billionaire businessman, secure in his linguistic privacy, discovers that the quiet woman cleaning his boardroom understands every calculated word he speaks? What unfolds when years of careful observation meet a moment of absolute truth? This is not just a story about money and power. This is not simply a tale of prejudice overcome. This is the extraordinary account of how one woman's silent strength, her hidden knowledge, and her unwavering dignity transformed not just a room full of wealthy executives, but the very foundation of how they saw the world around them. It's about the moment when someone who had been rendered invisible suddenly became the most important person in the room. Some stories change how we see others. This story will change how you see yourself. Amira Hassan moved through the gleaming corridors of Meridian Financial Tower with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible. Her cleaning cart's wheels whispered against the polished marble floors as she made her way to the 42nd floor, where the most important business deals in the city were made and broken daily. At 53 years old, she had perfected the art of being present yet unseen, essential yet unnoticed. The Meridian Financial Building housed some of the wealthiest investment firms on the East Coast, and Amira had been part of its night cleaning crew for 7 years. She knew every corner of every office, every coffee stain that would appear on expensive mahogany desks, every wastebasket that would overflow with discarded dreams and million-dollar decisions. What the executives and their staff didn't know was that Amira understood far more than they could ever imagine. Born in Cairo to a family of educators, Amira had arrived in America 28 years ago with a master's degree in international relations and fluency in 5 languages. Life, however, had different plans than her education had prepared her for. Her husband Omar's sudden death in a construction accident had left her alone with 3 young children and crushing medical debt. The prestigious positions her degrees might have opened required time for interviews, networking, and building professional relationships, luxuries she couldn't afford when rent was due, and her children needed food on the table. Night cleaning work was available immediately, paid weekly, and asked no questions about accents or backgrounds. While her children slept, Amira worked, sending money she should have spent on career development instead, to keep their small apartment and put her kids through school. She told herself it was temporary, just until she could save enough to transition back to professional work. 7 years later, temporary had become permanent, but her children were thriving, and that made every silent night worthwhile. Ahmed al-Rashid owned a 30% stake in Meridian Financial and held court in the building's most exclusive conference room every Thursday evening. At 61, he was worth approximately $3.7 billion, with investments spanning from tech companies in Silicon Valley to oil refineries in Texas. His success story was legendary among business circles, the immigrant who had built an empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to predict market movements. What made Ahmed particularly formidable in negotiations was his strategic use of Arabic during sensitive discussions. While his business partners spoke only English, Ahmed would confer with his Middle Eastern investors in Arabic, discussing strategies, revealing true positions, and sharing information that would never be spoken in English within earshot of competitors or potential partners. It was a significant advantage that had helped him close deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. On this particular Thursday evening in October, Ahmed was hosting what would become the most important business meeting of the quarter. Representatives from Goldberg Capital, Morrison Holdings, and 3 other major investment firms had gathered to discuss a potential merger that would create one of the largest financial entities in the country. The stakes were enormous. Success would mean controlling assets worth over $40 billion. Amira entered the conference room at exactly 11:30 p.m., as she did every Thursday night. The executives had long since departed, leaving behind the usual debris of high-stakes negotiations: empty coffee cups, scattered papers, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne and tension. She began her methodical cleaning process, wiping down the 20-foot mahogany table, emptying wastebaskets, and ensuring every surface gleaned for the next day's meetings. What she discovered that night would change everything. Forgotten beneath a stack of documents was a digital recording device, still running. The red light blinked steadily, indicating it had been recording for hours. Amira recognized the device. She had seen similar ones left behind before, usually containing recorded negotiations that were later transcribed by assistants. But this one was different. Through its small speaker, she could hear Ahmed's voice, speaking in rapid Arabic to someone on a phone call that had apparently been connected for hours. Ahmed was not in the building. He had left with the others around 9 p.m., but his phone had somehow remained connected to the recording device, creating an open line that captured his private conversations throughout the evening. And what Amira heard made her hands freeze mid-motion as she processed the implications of his words. Speaking to what sounded like multiple people on a conference call, Ahmed was revealing the detailed strategies he planned to use against his American business partners. In Arabic, he discussed how he would manipulate upcoming votes, which board members he had already secretly bought influence with, and how he intended to structure the merger to benefit his Middle Eastern investors at the direct expense of the American partners who trusted him. More disturbing were his personal comments about the people he had been negotiating with just hours earlier. He referred to his American business partners using derogatory terms, mocked their negotiation strategies, and laughed about how easily he could deceive them because they assumed he was more trustworthy than he actually was. He specifically mentioned plans to use information he had gained in confidence to make strategic moves that would cost his partners millions while enriching himself and his overseas investors. But what made Amira's blood run cold were his comments about the people who worked in the building. In Arabic, he made disparaging remarks about the cleaning staff, referring to them as invisible furniture, and joking about how Americans were so focused on political correctness that they hired incompetent help just to appear diverse. He specifically mentioned seeing that black woman cleaning his conference room and laughed about how she probably couldn't even read the documents she was cleaning around, let alone understand their significance. Amira sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, her mind racing. She had been cleaning around these conversations for years, always tuning out business discussions that weren't her concern. But this was different. This wasn't just business strategy. This was fraud, manipulation, and a level of disrespect that cut to her core. The weight of what she knew pressed down on her shoulders. Ahmed al-Rashid was about to deceive some of the most powerful people in American finance, people who trusted him as a partner. Moreover, he was planning to do it in a way that would likely destroy several smaller investment firms and cost thousands of people their jobs. The merger he was manipulating would give him unprecedented power in American financial markets, power he clearly intended to abuse. For 20 minutes, Amira sat listening as Amir continued his Arabic conversations, each revelation more damaging than the last. He discussed bribing regulators, manipulating environmental impact studies for investments, and using shell companies to hide the true source of funding for various projects. This wasn't just unethical business practice, it was criminal activity that would have international implications. When the conversation finally ended and the device stopped recording, Amira faced an impossible decision. She was a night shift cleaning woman, with no credentials, no connections, and no reason to believe anyone would take her word against a billionaire. Ahmed al-Rashid commanded respect in boardrooms across the world, while she was practically invisible to the same people he was planning to deceive. But she also knew she couldn't remain silent. Too many people would be hurt by his actions, and her own sense of integrity wouldn't allow her to pretend she had never heard these conversations. Amira had spent years watching from the sidelines as decisions were made that affected thousands of lives, always staying quiet, always remaining invisible. But this time, remaining silent meant becoming complicit in something that violated everything she believed about honesty and fairness. She carefully ejected the digital recording from the device, replacing it with a blank one she found in the supply drawer. Technology had never been her strongest skill, but she had learned enough from her children to understand basic recording equipment. She slipped the original recording into her pocket, her hands trembling slightly as she contemplated what she was about to set in motion. The rest of her shift passed in a blur as she mechanically completed her cleaning duties while her mind worked through possible approaches. She could anonymously send the recording to news outlets, but without context or credibility, it might be dismissed as a hoax. She could try to reach the American business partners directly, but gaining access to billionaires was nearly impossible for someone in her position. As she prepared to leave the building at 6 a.m., Amira made a decision that would require every ounce of courage she possessed. She would find a way to ensure Ahmed al-Rashid faced consequences for his planned deception, but she would do it in a way that used her supposed invisibility as an advantage rather than a limitation. What Ahmed didn't realize was that the invisible woman he had mocked in Arabic had been taking mental notes on his business practices for 7 years. She knew his patterns, his associates, his weaknesses. And now she had the evidence to expose not just his immediate plans, but a pattern of corruption that went far deeper than a single merger.
End of 15 months? Then I'll say it and enter it into a giant banquet.
The sun was rising over the city as Amira walked to the bus stop, the recording device secure in her purse. She had always been underestimated because of her position, her accent, and her appearance. But today, those same characteristics that made her invisible would become her greatest strategic advantages. Ahmed al-Rashid was about to discover that the woman he had dismissed as incompetent help understood not just his language, but his character far better than he understood himself. And she was prepared to use both that knowledge and his own recorded words to ensure justice was served. The game had changed, though only one player knew it yet. In the world of high-stakes finance where information was power and deception was currency, the most valuable asset had just shifted from the billionaire's boardroom to the careful hands of the woman he had never bothered to truly see. The weekend that followed felt like the longest of Amira's life. She had hidden the recording device in a safety deposit box at her local bank, but she couldn't stop replaying Ahmed's words in her mind. Her 3 children noticed her distraction during their usual Saturday family breakfast, but she deflected their concerns with reassurances about work stress. How could she explain that she was carrying evidence that could topple one of the most powerful men in American finance? Her youngest daughter, Layla, now 22, and finishing her degree in journalism at Columbia University, sensed something deeper was troubling her mother.
Mama, you've been different since Friday morning.
Are you having problems at work? She asked in Arabic, their family's private language at home. Amira looked at her daughter, brilliant, idealistic, and equipped with exactly the skills and connections that might be needed for what Amira was contemplating. But involving Layla meant putting her child at risk, something she had spent years trying to avoid. Just thinking about some things I overheard, Habibti. Nothing you need to worry about. But Layla had inherited both her mother's intelligence and her father's stubborn streak. She recognized evasion when she heard it, and she knew her mother well enough to understand that things overheard at work could be significant in a building full of financial executives. Mama, you've been cleaning those offices for 7 years. You've never been troubled by overheard conversations before. What makes this different? That afternoon, while her other children were out with friends, Amira found herself confiding in Layla. She explained about the recording, about Ahmed's plans, about the magnitude of the deception she had uncovered. Layla listened with growing amazement and horror, her journalist's instincts immediately recognizing the significance of what her mother had discovered. Mama, do you understand what you have? Layla asked, her voice filled with excitement and concern. This isn't just a business ethics violation. You have evidence of securities fraud, bribery, market manipulation, crimes that could send him to prison for decades and prevent a financial disaster that would hurt millions of people. But Amira also understood the dangers involved, and who will believe the word of a night shift cleaning woman against a billionaire? Even with the recording, his lawyers will claim it was taken illegally, that it's been manipulated, that it's taken out of context. Meanwhile, I will lose my job, possibly face legal retaliation, and our family will suffer. Layla spent the rest of the weekend researching Ahmed al-Rashid and the pending merger. What she discovered confirmed her mother's concerns about the stakes involved. The merger would indeed create unprecedented concentration of financial power, and if Ahmed's manipulation succeeded, it would happen in a way that could trigger economic instability while enriching foreign investors at American expense. The national security implications alone were staggering, but Layla also discovered something that gave her hope. Ahmed had enemies. People who had been hurt by his previous business practices and would be motivated to ensure justice was served if they had the right evidence. More importantly, she identified potential allies who could help protect her mother while ensuring the information reached the right people. Monday morning, Amira returned to work with a plan that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She would continue her regular duties, maintaining her invisible status, while carefully documenting Ahmed's activities and gathering additional evidence. But she would also begin positioning herself to ensure maximum impact when the time came to reveal what she knew. Her first step was to begin paying closer attention to the papers and documents left behind in Ahmed's conference room. She started photographing anything that seemed relevant to the merger discussions, using the old smartphone Layla had given her when she upgraded to a newer model. The photos were poor quality, but they captured enough detail to provide context for the recorded conversations. She also began keeping detailed notes about Ahmed's schedule, his associates, and his behavioral patterns. Over the years, she had unconsciously absorbed enormous amounts of information about his business operations simply by being present in his spaces week after week. Now she began systematically organizing that knowledge, creating a comprehensive picture of how his corrupt network operated. What surprised her was how much she actually knew about his business dealings just from cleaning around them. Financial documents left on desks, phone conversations conducted while she worked, casual remarks made to associates who assumed she didn't understand English well enough to follow complex business discussions. All of it had created a detailed map of Ahmed's activities that she had never consciously assembled before. The breakthrough came on Wednesday evening. Ahmed was hosting a smaller meeting with just 2 associates, both of whom spoke Arabic. Amira was cleaning an adjacent conference room when she heard them discussing final preparations for the merger vote scheduled for the following week. But this conversation revealed something even more damaging than what she had recorded previously. Ahmed was explaining how he had been deliberately feeding false information to his American partners about the true financial condition of the companies involved in the merger. Some of the businesses were actually in much worse financial shape than the public reports indicated, but Ahmed had used his influence to suppress negative auditing results. The merger was essentially a scheme to use American investor money to bail out failing Middle Eastern investments while creating an illusion of profitable growth. Even worse, he was coordinating with government officials in 3 different countries to ensure that regulatory approval would be fast-tracked regardless of legitimate concerns about market concentration or foreign influence. The bribes involved were not just individual payments but systemic corruption that compromised financial oversight across international boundaries. Amira realized that what she was witnessing was not just securities fraud but potential economic warfare, a deliberate effort to manipulate American financial markets for foreign political and economic advantage. The implications extended far beyond individual investors to national economic security. That night, she made copies of everything she had gathered and stored them in 3 separate locations. She also wrote detailed letters explaining what she had witnessed, sealing them in envelopes addressed to her children with instructions to open them only if something happened to her. She was entering dangerous territory, and she needed to ensure her information would survive even if she didn't. Thursday brought news that changed everything. Layla called her mother early that morning with information she had gathered through her journalism connections. Ahmed was accelerating his timeline. The merger vote had been moved up to Friday afternoon, with final documentation being prepared that very day. If Amira was going to act, she had perhaps 18 hours before Ahmed's plans became irreversible. More urgently, Layla had learned that Ahmed was aware someone had been in his conference room the previous Thursday night. Security footage had shown Amira's presence in the room at the time the recording device was active, and while he didn't yet suspect her specifically, he was beginning to investigate who might have had access to his private conversations. "Mama, you have to move now," Layla insisted. "If he realizes what you know before you can get the information to the right people, you'll be in serious danger. Men like Ahmed don't just fire people who threaten their billion-dollar plans." Amira felt the walls closing in around her, but she also felt a clarity she hadn't experienced since her husband's death. For 28 years in America, she had accepted invisibility as the price of survival. She had swallowed indignities, overlooked injustices, and remained silent in the face of prejudice because protecting her family required avoiding confrontation. But this moment demanded something different from her. She spent Thursday morning making preparations that would either lead to justice or destroy her life entirely. She called in sick to work for the first time in 7 years, claiming a family emergency that would excuse her absence for several days. She withdrew money from her savings account and arranged for her younger children to stay with their aunt in New Jersey if necessary. Most importantly, she reached out to someone she had never expected to contact, David Morrison, the senior partner at Morrison Holdings who stood to lose the most from Ahmed's manipulation. Morrison was one of Ahmed's primary targets, and his firm represented exactly the kind of established American financial institution that Ahmed planned to deceive and ultimately destroy. Getting access to David Morrison seemed impossible until Layla suggested an approach that used Amira's invisibility as an advantage rather than an obstacle. Instead of trying to reach Morrison through official channels where she would be dismissed as a crank caller, Amira would intercept him at his most vulnerable and unguarded moment. During his regular Thursday afternoon visit to his mother at the exclusive assisted living facility where he spent an hour every week, Layla had discovered Morrison's routine through public records research and social media analysis, skills she had learned in journalism school that proved invaluable for uncovering the personal patterns of public figures. Morrison's mother, Elena Morrison, lived at Sunrise Manor, and David visited her every Thursday at 3 p.m. with clockwork regularity. At 2:30 Thursday afternoon, Amira positioned herself in the lobby of Sunrise Manor, carrying cleaning supplies and wearing her work uniform. To the staff and visitors, she appeared to be maintenance personnel taking a break between tasks. When David Morrison arrived, she would have approximately 30 seconds to convince him to listen to something that would sound impossible coming from someone in her position. She watched through the facility's windows as Morrison's black sedan pulled into the parking lot. At 55 years old, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in most rooms. But Amira had observed enough powerful men to recognize the subtle signs of stress and pressure. Morrison was clearly feeling the weight of the merger negotiations, though he had no idea how badly he was being deceived. As Morrison approached the lobby entrance, Amira stood and positioned herself to intercept him without appearing threatening. She had practiced this moment in her mind dozens of times, but her heart was racing as she prepared to transform from invisible cleaning woman to whistleblower in a single conversation. "Morrison," she said quietly as he reached for the door handle, "I need 60 seconds of your time to save your company $40 billion. Morrison stopped and turned, his expression shifting from polite dismissal to sharp attention as he processed both her words and her confident delivery. For the first time in years, Amira was not invisible to one of the most powerful men in American finance. "I clean the conference room where Ahmed al-Rashid holds his merger meetings," she continued before he could respond. "And I understand Arabic." Morrison's eyes widened as the implications hit him immediately. In just 20 words, Amira had communicated that she had access, opportunity, and capability that no one else possessed. Morrison had not survived 30 years in high-stakes finance without recognizing when someone held valuable information. "What do you know?" he asked, his tone shifting to the same intensity he used in billion-dollar negotiations. "Everything," Amira replied, "and I have proof." David Morrison's private office occupied the top floor of Morrison Holdings' downtown headquarters, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. But for the past 2 hours, neither he nor Amira had paid any attention to the scenery. They sat across from each other at a small conference table, the digital recording device between them like a loaded weapon, while Morrison's face grew increasingly grave with each revelation. Amira had begun by playing selected portions of Ahmed's Arabic conversations, providing simultaneous translation that revealed the depth of his planned deception. Morrison's command of international finance was sophisticated enough that he immediately understood the implications of each piece of information, but hearing the casual cruelty in Ahmed's voice as he mocked his American partners clearly affected him on a personal level. "The bastard has been sitting in my conference room, accepting my hospitality, shaking my hand, and planning to destroy my company the entire time," Morrison said, his usually controlled demeanor cracking slightly. "But what I don't understand is why you're bringing this to me. You could have sold this information, demanded payment for your silence, or simply stayed out of it entirely. Why take this risk?" Amira had anticipated this question, but answering it required revealing parts of herself she had kept hidden for years. "Mr. Morrison, for 7 years I have cleaned the offices of powerful people, and for 7 years I have been treated as if I were furniture. Not badly necessarily, but as if I were not fully human, not worthy of real consideration. I accepted this because I needed the work, and because I told myself that invisibility was a fair trade for stability." She paused, choosing her words carefully. But Ahmed's conversations revealed something beyond business fraud. "He sees people like me not just as servants but as inherently inferior beings who exist only to serve people he considers more worthy. His plans will hurt thousands of people who work in your industry, but his contempt extends to millions of people who look like me, who speak with accents like mine, who work in positions like mine." Morrison listened intently as she continued. "I cannot stop all prejudice, and I cannot change how most people see someone in my position. But I can prevent Ahmed al-Rashid from succeeding in a scheme that enriches him specifically because he believes people like me are too ignorant to understand what he is doing. This is not just about your merger, Mr. Trapper, Morrison. This is about whether people who underestimate others because of their appearance or position should profit from that underestimation." The conviction in her voice surprised Morrison, who had built his career on reading people and recognizing authenticity. He was also beginning to understand that Amira represented an opportunity not just to prevent Ahmed's fraud, but to expose it in a way that would have maximum impact and minimal legal risk for Morrison's company. "Mrs. Hassan," he said, using the name she had provided along with her full background when they began their conversation. "You understand that what you're proposing will destroy Ahmed's career, potentially send him to prison, and definitely make you a target for retaliation. Are you prepared for those consequences?" I have been preparing for 3 days, Mr. Morrison. My children are safe, my important documents are secure, and my conscience is clear. But I need your help to ensure this information reaches the right people in a way that cannot be suppressed or discredited. Morrison spent the next hour making phone calls while Amira waited. He contacted federal regulators, financial crimes investigators, and attorneys specializing in international securities fraud. What emerged from these conversations was a coordinated plan that would maximize the impact of Amira's evidence while protecting her from immediate retaliation. The plan required precise timing. Ahmed's manipulation had created a narrow window where his crimes could be proven and stopped, but only if multiple agencies acted simultaneously. The merger vote was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m., giving them less than 20 hours to coordinate federal intervention. More importantly, Morrison recognized that Amira's evidence was so damning that simply preventing the merger would not be sufficient justice. Ahmed's recorded conversations revealed a pattern of criminal activity spanning several years in multiple countries. This was an opportunity to dismantle an entire network of corruption rather than just stopping one fraudulent deal. Mrs. Hassan, I want you to understand something, Morrison said as evening approached. What you've brought me today is the most valuable information I've received in 30 years of business. Not just because it protects my company, but because it exposes a level of systematic corruption that threatens the integrity of American financial markets. You've performed a service to your country that most people will never know about, but that will protect millions of investors and thousands of jobs. But Amira was thinking beyond the immediate implications. Mr. Morrison, I want something in return for this information, but not what you might expect. I don't want money, and I don't want a job I'm not qualified for. I want Ahmed al-Rashid to know exactly who exposed him and why. Morrison looked surprised. That's extremely dangerous, Mrs. Hassan. Once Ahmed knows you were responsible, he'll stop at nothing to retaliate. Men with his resources and connections can make life very difficult for people who cross them.
Amira smiled for the first time since their conversation began.
Mr. Morrison, Ahmed al-Rashid has spent years assuming that people like me are invisible because we are ignorant, powerless, and irrelevant. I want him to understand that he was wrong on all 3 counts. I want him to know that his contempt for working people, for immigrants, for women who don't fit his definition of importance, directly caused his downfall. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. My husband died building this city, working construction on buildings that house people who never knew his name. My children have grown up in a country that offers them opportunities, but also requires them to prove their worth every day because of how they look and where their parents came from. I have spent 7 years being invisible in rooms where decisions are made that affect millions of lives. Turning back to Morrison, her voice carried a strength that commanded attention. Ahmed al-Rashid will discover that the woman he dismissed as incompetent help not only understood every word of his Arabic conversations, but understood their implications well enough to dismantle his entire criminal enterprise. He will learn that his victims are not as powerless as he assumed, and that his own prejudices blinded him to threats he should have recognized. Morrison realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. In his 3 decades of high-stakes business negotiations, he had rarely encountered someone who combined Amira's level of strategic thinking with her moral clarity and personal courage. She was not just seeking justice. She was engineering it with surgical precision. Friday morning arrived with a flurry of coordinated activity. Federal agents simultaneously raided Ahmed's offices, his home, and his associates' businesses. Financial regulators froze assets connected to the merger while conducting emergency reviews of documentation Amira had helped them understand. International cooperation agreements were activated to investigate Ahmed's activities in 3 countries simultaneously. But the most important event was scheduled for Friday at 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the merger vote was set to begin. Morrison had arranged for Ahmed to receive a private message requesting his immediate presence in the Meridian Financial Building's main conference room for an urgent consultation about last-minute merger complications. Ahmed arrived expecting to find Morrison and the other American partners in crisis mode, possibly desperate enough to accept even more favorable terms than he had planned to demand. Instead, he walked into a room containing Morrison, 2 federal agents, Amira Hassan, and a complete transcript of every Arabic conversation he had conducted over the past 2 weeks. The look of confusion, then recognition, then absolute shock that crossed Ahmed's face as he processed the situation was everything Amira had hoped for. She watched as his gaze moved from the federal agents to the transcripts to her face and saw the exact moment when he realized that the invisible cleaning woman had orchestrated his complete destruction. Mr. al-Rashid, Agent Jennifer Chen of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division said formally, "You are under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of federal officials, and violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You have the right to remain silent."
But Ahmed wasn't listening to the arrest warnings.
He was staring at Amira with a mixture of disbelief and rage, finally understanding that the woman he had mocked as incompetent had not only understood every word of his Arabic conversations, but had used that knowledge to destroy him. "You," he said in Arabic, his voice filled with venom. "You did this." Amira responded in perfect formal Arabic, her tone calm and dignified. "I did exactly what you assumed I could never do, Mr. Penn. Al-Rashid. I understood not just your language, but your character, and I acted on that understanding to protect people you planned to harm." She switched to English so everyone in the room could understand her final words to him. "You believed that people like me exist only to serve people like you, that we are too ignorant to understand what you do, and too powerless to stop you. Today you learned that you were wrong about both our intelligence and our power, but most importantly, you learned that your contempt for others is not a strength, it is the weakness that destroyed you." Ahmed's face went white as the full implications hit him. He had been brought down not by a competitor, not by a government investigation, not by a business rival, but by someone he had considered beneath his notice. The woman who had cleaned his conference room had systematically gathered the evidence that would send him to prison and destroy everything he had built. As the federal agents led Ahmed away in handcuffs, Morrison turned to Amira with an expression of genuine respect. "Mrs. Hassan, what you accomplished here goes far beyond preventing financial fraud. You've demonstrated something that our entire industry needed to be reminded of. That integrity and intelligence exist at every level of society, and that underestimating people because of their position or background is not just morally wrong, it's strategically dangerous." But for Amira, the most important moment came as Ahmed passed by her on his way out of the conference room. She had spent 7 years being invisible to men like him, accepting their assumptions about her capabilities and worth. Today, she had forced one of the most powerful among them to see her clearly, to understand that his victim was not powerless, and that his own prejudices had made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of justice he never imagined could touch him. As the conference room emptied, Amira gathered her purse and prepared to leave the building where she had worked in anonymity for 7 years. She would not be returning as a cleaning woman, but she was leaving as something far more valuable, as someone who had proven that invisibility could be a choice rather than an imposition, and that justice could come from the most unexpected sources. The aftermath of Ahmed al-Rashid's arrest rippled through financial markets with seismic force. Within hours, news of the fraud scheme dominated every major business network, and by Monday morning, the story had become the lead item on international news programs. But for Amira Hassan, the weekend brought a different kind of reckoning as she confronted the reality of what her courage had set in motion. Saturday morning found her in an FBI field office, spending 6 hours providing detailed testimony about everything she had witnessed over 7 years of cleaning Ahmed's conference room. Agent Chen and her team treated Amira with a respect she had rarely experienced in professional settings. But the process was exhausting as she recounted countless instances of suspicious behavior she had observed and dismissed as none of her business. "Mrs. Hassan," Agent Chen said during a break in the testimony, "I want you to understand the scope of what you've uncovered. Ahmed's recordings don't just document fraud related to this merger. They reveal connections to terrorist financing, money laundering operations in 4 countries, and a systematic effort to manipulate American energy markets for foreign political advantage. This investigation will likely take years to complete fully." The weight of those implications settled heavily on Amira's shoulders. She had thought she was simply preventing a fraudulent business deal, but apparently she had exposed a network of criminal activity that threatened national security. The responsibility felt overwhelming for someone who just days earlier had been worried about losing her cleaning job. But Agent Chen wasn't finished. More importantly, you need to understand that Ahmed had powerful allies who are not currently under arrest. Some of them will view you as a threat that needs to be eliminated. We're going to provide protection, but your life has changed permanently. There's no going back to invisibility after this. Sunday brought an unexpected visitor to Amira's apartment. David Morrison arrived personally, something that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier when she was simply the woman who cleaned his building. He came with news that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Amira," he said, using her first name naturally now, "the story broke worldwide this morning. Ahmed's arrest is front-page news in financial centers from London to Tokyo. But more importantly, the method of his exposure is capturing public attention in a way that's unprecedented. He showed her newspapers and online articles from around the world. Headlines read, "Cleaning woman brings down billionaire fraudster," "The invisible hero who saved American finance," and "How prejudice became a criminal's fatal weakness." International media was portraying her story as a modern David and Goliath tale that transcended typical business fraud coverage. "Amira, you've become a symbol," Morrison continued, "not just of whistleblowing courage, but of how underestimating people based on their position or background can be catastrophically dangerous. Business schools are already discussing your case study. You've changed how people think about who has power and who deserves attention." But global attention brought global scrutiny. By Monday morning, reporters were camping outside Amira's apartment building, and her phone was ringing constantly with interview requests from news organizations around the world. Her children were being approached at school and work by journalists wanting family perspectives on their mother's transformation from cleaning woman to international hero. More disturbing were the threatening messages that began arriving through social media and email. Ahmed's supporters, particularly those from his Middle Eastern business network, viewed Amira's actions as a betrayal of ethnic solidarity and an abandonment of loyalty to someone who shared her cultural background. The messages ranged from accusations of being a traitor to her heritage to explicit threats against her safety and that of her family. The stress was beginning to show when Layla suggested a family meeting to discuss how they would handle their dramatically changed circumstances. Amira's oldest son, Omar Jr., now 26 and working as an engineer, had taken time off work to help coordinate family security. Her middle daughter, Fatima, 24, and in medical school, was fielding calls from reporters and trying to maintain her studies despite constant disruption. "Mama," Layla said as they gathered around the kitchen table that had hosted so many important family conversations over the years. "You saved the country from a massive financial fraud, but you also changed all our lives forever. We need to decide as a family how we're going to handle what comes next." The conversation that followed revealed just how much courage Amira's actions had required and how much sacrifice her family was prepared to make to support her decision. Omar Jr. had been threatened at work by people who blamed his mother for betraying a fellow Arab. Fatima had been confronted at the hospital by individuals who accused her family of seeking attention and money through false accusations against a respected businessman. But what surprised Amira was the unanimous support her children expressed for what she had done. "Mama," Omar Jr. said, "I'm proud that when you were faced with the choice between safety and justice, you chose justice. That's the lesson Papa always taught us, and that's the legacy I want my children to inherit." Fatima agreed. What Ahmed al-Rashid did wasn't just financial fraud, it was an attack on everything America claims to represent about equal opportunity and fair treatment. If people like him succeed because people like us stay silent, then we're complicit in our own oppression. Layla was most direct. "Mama, you've proven that invisible doesn't mean powerless and that intelligence exists everywhere, not just in corner offices. But now you have to decide what to do with the platform you've created." That platform was becoming increasingly prominent. By Tuesday, Amira had received invitations to testify before Congress about financial oversight failures, to speak at business conferences about ethical decision-making, and to participate in documentaries about corporate fraud. Universities were offering her honorary degrees, and publishers were proposing book deals about her experience. Most surprisingly, job offers began arriving from organizations that recognized her unique combination of intelligence, integrity, and insight. Morrison Holdings offered her a position as a consultant on ethical compliance with a salary that exceeded what she had made in 7 years of night cleaning. Other financial firms made similar offers, wanting to associate themselves with her story and benefit from her perspective on corporate culture. But the most meaningful offer came from an unexpected source. The Department of Homeland Security reached out through Agent Chen, proposing that Amira consider a position analyzing international financial communications for patterns that might indicate criminal activity. Her combination of language skills, cultural knowledge, and proven ability to recognize significant information while maintaining cover made her potentially invaluable for national security work. Mrs. Hassan, the DHS representative, explained during a confidential meeting, "There are thousands of people in positions similar to your previous job, service workers, translators, administrative staff, who have access to valuable intelligence but no framework for reporting it effectively. Your case has shown us that we need to create systems that can identify and protect people who witness criminal activity in their workplace." The offer was compelling, but it also represented a complete transformation of her life's trajectory. At 53, she would be starting a new career that required security clearances, ongoing education, and constant vigilance. It was an opportunity to serve her country in a way that used all her skills and experience, but it also meant permanent visibility and potential danger. Wednesday brought the news that Ahmed's criminal network was even more extensive than initially understood. Raids conducted in coordination with international law enforcement agencies had uncovered evidence of criminal activities spanning 2 decades and involving billions of dollars in fraudulent transactions. Ahmed was facing potential sentences that could keep him in prison for the rest of his life. But the investigation also revealed something that chilled Amira's blood. Among the evidence seized from Ahmed's personal files were detailed dossiers on dozens of service workers in buildings where he conducted business. He had been systematically gathering information about cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and administrative personnel, apparently concerned about potential security breaches. Amira's file contained her home address, her children's schools and workplaces, her financial information, and notes about her daily routines. Ahmed had been aware of her presence and had been monitoring her for months, possibly years. She had not been invisible to him. She had been under surveillance by someone who viewed her as a potential threat long before she actually became one. The revelation changed everything about how she understood her situation. Ahmed's dismissive comments about her incompetence had been performance, designed to make his associates underestimate the risk she represented, while he gathered information to use against her if necessary. She had been playing a game whose rules she didn't understand, against an opponent who had been preparing for years. "This makes your safety situation much more serious," Agent Chen explained during an emergency briefing. Ahmed wasn't just careless about security, he was actively managing it. "He has detailed information about you and your family that he could have shared with associates before his arrest. We need to assume that his criminal network views you as an ongoing threat that needs to be eliminated." The conversation forced Amira to confront the possibility that her family might never be truly safe as long as Ahmed's associates remained free. The courage that had led her to expose his crimes now required her to accept that she had become a permanent target for people with vast resources and international connections. Thursday evening brought a moment of clarity that helped Amira understand the full significance of what she had set in motion. She was reviewing news coverage of Ahmed's case when she came across an article from a Lebanese newspaper describing him as a hero who had been betrayed by an ungrateful servant who forgot her place. The phrase stopped her cold. Forgot her place. In those 3 words was everything she had been fighting against. The assumption that people like her had assigned roles in society that they were not supposed to transcend. That challenging powerful people was not just risky, but fundamentally inappropriate for someone of her background and position. But she realized that she had not forgotten her place. She had redefined it. Her place was not in the shadows, accepting injustice and remaining silent about crime because challenging powerful people was supposedly beyond her social role. Her place was wherever her intelligence, integrity, and courage could serve justice and protect the innocent. The article helped her understand that Ahmed's supporters were angry, not just because she had exposed his crimes, but because she had violated their expectations about social hierarchy. A cleaning woman was not supposed to bring down a billionaire. An immigrant was not supposed to challenge established power structures. A woman working multiple jobs to support her family was not supposed to have the knowledge and strategic thinking needed to dismantle international criminal networks. Friday brought the decision that would determine the rest of her life. After a week of considering offers, weighing risks, and consulting with her family, Amira chose to accept the position with the Department of Homeland Security. She would become a specialist in financial intelligence, using her unique combination of language skills, cultural knowledge, and proven investigative instincts to identify threats that traditional law enforcement might miss. But she also decided to accept selected speaking engagements and media interviews, not for personal attention, but to send a message to people in similar positions around the world. She wanted other, invisible workers to understand that they had power they might not recognize, that their observations and insights could be valuable to society, and that speaking up against injustice was not just acceptable, but necessary. Her first public appearance was scheduled for the following Monday, a congressional hearing on financial oversight, where she would testify about the systemic failures that allowed Ahmed's fraud to continue undetected for so long. It would be her first time speaking publicly about her experience, and her first opportunity to explain to the American people why someone in her position had chosen to risk everything for justice. As she prepared for that moment, Amira reflected on how much had changed since the Thursday night when she had discovered Ahmed's recording device. 7 days had transformed her from an invisible service worker to a nationally recognized symbol of courage and integrity. But more importantly, she had proven to herself and the world that intelligence, dignity, and power were not determined by job titles or bank account balances. Ahmed al-Rashid had made the fatal mistake of assuming that people he considered beneath his notice were actually beneath his concern. That assumption had cost him everything and had created an opportunity for justice that might never have existed otherwise. Now Amira faced the challenge of using the platform her courage had created to ensure that other powerful people understood the same lesson. That underestimating others because of their position or background was not just morally wrong, but strategically dangerous in a world where justice could come from the most unexpected sources. 6 months after Ahmed al-Rashid's arrest, Amira Hassan stood before the International Conference on Financial Ethics in Geneva, addressing an audience of regulators, business leaders, and law enforcement officials from 40 countries. The woman who had once moved invisibly through corporate corridors now commanded attention from some of the most powerful people in global finance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began in clear, confident English, "I want to tell you about the day I stopped being invisible." The speech had been crafted over weeks of preparation with communication specialists, but the words that mattered most came from her own experience. She spoke about the systemic assumptions that allow financial crime to flourish, about the intelligence and integrity that exist at every level of society, and about the dangerous consequences of underestimating people based on their position or appearance. Ahmed al-Rashid's greatest strength was also his fatal weakness, she explained to the rapt audience. He was brilliant at understanding financial markets, political networks, and regulatory systems. But he failed to understand people. He assumed that someone in my position would never pose a threat to someone in his position. That assumption cost him his freedom and saved the American economy from a devastating fraud. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, but for Amira, the most meaningful moment came afterward, when a young woman approached her during the reception. She introduced herself as Maria Santos, a maintenance worker at a major bank in Sao Paulo who had been witnessing suspicious activities but had never considered that her observations might be valuable to authorities. "Mrs. Hassan," Maria said in halting English, "your story showed me that people like us can make a difference. I have been documenting things I see at work, and after hearing you speak, I think I need to contact the Brazilian financial authorities." That conversation represented exactly what Amira had hoped to achieve through her public appearances. Around the world, service workers, administrative staff, and other invisible employees were beginning to understand that their unique access to information came with both opportunity and responsibility. The impact was becoming measurable. The Department of Homeland Security had established the Hassan Protocol, a new system for receiving and investigating reports from service workers who witnessed potential criminal activity. In its first 6 months, the protocol had generated leads that led to investigations of money laundering operations in 12 countries. More broadly, Amira's case had sparked conversations about workplace intelligence and the value of perspectives from people traditionally excluded from decision-making processes. Business schools were teaching case studies about how Ahmed's prejudices had made him vulnerable, and security consultants were advising clients about the risks of ignoring or underestimating support staff. But the personal cost of her transformation remained significant. Amira's family had been forced to relocate twice due to security concerns, and her children had all changed their names and moved to different cities as a precautionary measure. The threats from Ahmed's associates had never materialized into actual violence, but the constant vigilance required to maintain safety had taken an emotional toll on everyone. Ahmed himself was serving a sentence of 32 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges that included securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. His business empire had been dismantled, with assets seized and distributed to victims of his various schemes. But his criminal network had proven more resilient, with several key associates successfully fleeing to countries without extradition treaties. The financial impact of Amira's revelations continued to unfold. The merger that Ahmed had planned to manipulate was restructured as a legitimate transaction that actually benefited American investors and workers. David Morrison's company had not only survived but prospered, becoming a leader in ethical business practices and transparent international partnerships. Morrison had become something of a mentor to Amira as she navigated her new role in the financial intelligence community. Their relationship had evolved from the desperate alliance formed in crisis to genuine mutual respect based on shared commitment to integrity and justice. "Amira," he said during one of their regular consultations, "what you accomplished goes beyond preventing fraud. You've changed how our entire industry thinks about intelligence, security, and the value of different perspectives. That might be your most important legacy. Her work with the Department of Homeland Security had exceeded all expectations. Amira's unique combination of language skills, cultural knowledge, and proven investigative instincts made her invaluable for analyzing international financial communications. She had helped identify criminal networks that traditional law enforcement had missed, precisely because she understood cultural contexts and communication patterns that others overlooked. But her most significant contribution was developing training programs for other potential whistleblowers. Working with Agent Chen and a team of psychologists, Amira created protocols that helped service workers recognize criminal activity, understand their legal protections, and report suspicious behavior safely. The program was based on a simple but revolutionary premise that people in support positions often had better access to valuable intelligence than traditional law enforcement sources, but lacked frameworks for reporting what they observed. By creating systematic ways to collect and analyze information from cleaning staff, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, and similar employees, law enforcement agencies could identify criminal activity much earlier in its development. 1 year after Ahmed's arrest, the program had been implemented in major cities across the United States and was being adopted by law enforcement agencies in Europe and Asia. Early results suggested that it could revolutionize financial crime detection by leveraging the intelligence of people who had always been present but never consulted. Amira's personal journey had also taken unexpected directions. The young woman who had arrived in America 29 years ago with advanced degrees but no connections had finally found a career that used all her abilities. She was completing a doctoral program in international criminal justice while working full-time, supported by universities that recognized the value of her unique perspective. Her children had thrived despite the disruptions to their lives. Omar Jr. had been recruited by a tech company specifically because of his experience with security issues. Fatima was completing her medical residency with a focus on treating victims of financial crimes, and Layla had become an investigative journalist specializing in international corruption. "Mama," Layla said during a family dinner celebrating the first anniversary of Ahmed's arrest, "do you ever regret what you did? Your life was simpler before, and we were all safer." Amira considered the question carefully before responding. "Habibti, for 28 years in this country, I accepted that my role was to remain quiet, work hard, and not cause problems for anyone. I told myself that invisibility was the price of survival, and that my job was to ensure you children could have opportunities I never had." She paused, looking around the table at the three remarkable adults her children had become. "But what I learned that night in Ahmed's conference room was that sometimes staying quiet makes you complicit in other people's suffering. If I had remained invisible, Ahmed would have destroyed thousands of jobs, stolen billions of dollars, and proven that people like us will never challenge people like him, no matter what they do." Omar Jr. nodded thoughtfully. "So you chose to become visible." "I chose to become myself," Amira corrected. "For the first time since coming to America, I acted according to my education, my values, and my full capabilities, rather than according to what other people expected from someone in my position. That choice changed our lives, but it also changed who we understand ourselves to be." The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on themes that had become central to Amira's public speaking: the difference between safety and justice, the relationship between privilege and responsibility, and the power that comes from refusing to accept others' limitations on your potential. 2 years after Ahmed's arrest, Amira received news that brought her story full circle. Ahmed was being transferred to a minimum security facility where he would serve the remainder of his sentence while participating in a program designed to help federal prisoners develop skills for eventual reintegration into society. As part of this program, Ahmed had requested a meeting with Amira, mediated by prison officials and her security team. The stated purpose was for him to apologize for his crimes and their impact on her life. But Amira suspected his motives were more complex. After careful consideration and consultation with her family and security advisors, she agreed to the meeting. It would take place in a secure conference room at the federal facility where Ahmed was incarcerated, with multiple officials present and extensive recording equipment to ensure both participants' safety. The man who entered the conference room bore little resemblance to the confident billionaire who had once commanded international business meetings. Ahmed al-Rashid appeared older, thinner, and marked by the weight of his circumstances. But his eyes still held the intelligence that had made him formidable. And Amira remained cautious as she assessed his demeanor. "Mrs. Hassan," he said in English, his voice carefully controlled, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this meeting requires courage and generosity that I do not deserve." Amira waited for him to continue. having learned from her security training that silence often encouraged more honest communication than questions. "I have had 2 years to think about what happened between us," Ahmed continued. 2 years to understand how my assumptions and prejudices made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of justice I never imagined could touch me. You were right when you said that my contempt for others was a weakness, not a strength.
He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts carefully.
But I want you to know that my contempt was not really about you personally, or even about people in your position generally. It was about my own fear that I did not deserve the power I had accumulated, and my need to convince myself that others were less worthy so that I could feel more secure in my position. Amira found his analysis surprisingly insightful, but she remained skeptical about his motivations for sharing it. "Al-Rashid, why did you ask for this meeting? What do you hope to accomplish by telling me this?" Ahmed's composure cracked slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine remorse. "Mrs. Hassan, I destroyed my own life through arrogance and criminal behavior that I cannot excuse. But I also put you and your family at risk, and I turned you into a target for people who blame you for my downfall. I wanted to tell you face to face that your actions were not betrayal, they were justice. And I wanted to apologize for creating a situation where you had to risk everything to do what was right." The apology was more complete than Amira had expected, but she recognized that it was also inadequate to address the full scope of what Ahmed had set in motion. "Mr. Al-Rashid, do you understand that your criminal activities went far beyond the merger fraud? Do you comprehend the international security implications of what you are doing?" Ahmed nodded slowly. "The federal prosecutors have made certain that I understand the full scope of my crimes. And back you. I was not just stealing money. I was undermining the financial systems that millions of people depend on for their security and prosperity. I was betraying the country that had given me opportunities I could never have found elsewhere." He met her eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. "Mrs. Hassan, what you did was not just personally courageous, it was patriotic in the truest sense. You protected American financial markets from foreign manipulation, you prevented economic damage that would have hurt innocent people, and you demonstrated that integrity exists at every level of society. I hope that someday I can contribute something positive to society again, but I know I can never undo the damage I caused." As the meeting concluded, Amira realized that Ahmed's apology, while genuine, was less important than what the conversation revealed about how completely their positions had reversed. The man who had once commanded billions of dollars in international respect was now seeking validation from the woman he had once dismissed as insignificant. More importantly, she understood that her victory over Ahmed was not just personal, but symbolic. She had proven that justice could come from unexpected sources, that intelligence and integrity were more powerful than wealth and connections, and that people who were underestimated because of their position or background could change the world when they chose to act according to their full capabilities. 3 years after that Thursday night when she had discovered Ahmed's recording device, Amira Hassan had become an internationally recognized expert on financial crime detection and a symbol of courage for working people around the world. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven to herself and millions of others that invisibility was a choice, not an imposition, and that justice was not limited to those who occupied positions of obvious power. The woman who had once cleaned conference rooms in silence now shaped policy in those same rooms. The immigrant who had once accepted prejudice as the price of survival now fought against systemic discrimination as part of her daily work. The mother who had once feared for her family's security now helped protect national security through her expertise and insight. Ahmed al-Rashid had believed that people like Amira Hassan existed only to serve people like himself. His destruction of that belief had cost him everything and had created opportunities for justice that might never have existed otherwise. In trying to render her invisible, he had made her indispensable. In underestimating her intelligence, he had revealed his own limitations. In dismissing her power, he had taught the world that real power came not from wealth or position, but from courage, integrity, and the willingness to act when action was required. The billionaire had spoken Arabic. Assuming no one understood, the black maid's reply had indeed shocked the room, and ultimately, the world.